Welcome, soul seekers. I am one of your soul guides, Patricia Rivera-Wolfson.
Hello, hello, everybody. I am your other soul guide. My name is Linda Krause-Barnett, and today we have an amazing interview with Rachel Rosen, who is on a mission, and I got this right directly from her Facebook page, to spark and sustain conversations about inclusion, racial equity, and courageous leadership. So how amazing is that?
This looks good.
It looks good. I like it.
Now, the cool thing about Rachel, our guest today, is that we actually met at the same place that Linda and I met, which was, through the Infinite Receiving event. And Rachel and I actually were guest speakers, and we did a panel all about communication. And at the time, I was really focused on, my personal business was really focused on communication. And even though that's still a big thing for me, at the time we were talking about communication together. And it was Rachel, myself, and this woman, Sage Hobbs, who is also a communication expert and has an amazing book called Naked Communication. But that's another story. But about 2 years ago, and if you watch the Tuesday video, you've already heard this, but in case you haven't, I want to be transparent and share that this interview was actually took place 2 years ago. And I did call her up. Actually, I didn't call her. I wrote to her and checked that this was still okay for us to air now, because it is unfortunately still very relevant. 2 years ago, I reached out to Rachel to talk to her about this because so much was happening at the time. There was this, big buzz about, inclusion. And it feels odd to say that it was a buzz, but it was like this swelling of voices, a lot of people talking about the racial inequity that was happening. And I wanted to do something about it. It had finally hit my awareness on a level like it had never hit before. And so I reached out to a couple of people, Rachel being one of them, and I did this interview. And then I never aired it. Now, the show that I had originally done the interview for never happened. But after deep introspection, I also realized that part of the reason I didn't air it was because I was afraid. I was afraid of the backlash. I was afraid I wouldn't be able to answer people in an educated way. And I was really afraid of sticking my foot in my mouth about a topic that I didn't know much about. And I know that this has been Rachel's mission for as long as I've known her, and way before that. She was a teacher and an amazing woman. And I think it would be really important for us to hear what she has to say about what is going on in our country right now. And even though the conversation was from 2 years ago, it is still completely relevant. And we're going to delve even deeper into this topic by really discussing things that maybe are difficult. I want to get deep, deep down into the actual healing of women, of people, of everyone. The purpose for this show for me is really to ask the difficult questions, also expose people to different modalities of healing, because there's so many ways that you can heal. But the number one way that I truly feel that you can heal is, number one, by having conversations, important conversations, asking difficult questions to yourself, to your friends, to your community. And so it is really, really fitting that my very first guest on this new show is my very dear friend, Rachel Rosen, who also happens to be one of the most amazing women that I know, and a total badass, because she facilitates conversations about racial equity for a living. She is the founder of S.P.A.R.K Leadership, of the S.P.A.R.K community. She is a coach, and she is an educator with 12 years of experience in the educational area, and she is doing so many amazing things and exciting things. I can't wait for you to meet her. Rachel, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you. It's such an honor to be here. I'm so thrilled to have this conversation with you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. When I first met her, I was immediately in awe. I was immediately in awe of you, because you just had your shit together. You were gorgeous and intelligent and articulate and so unbelievably aware of all of the intricacies. And as you guys know, I call myself a communication coach, but Rachel is like, a communication coach to the utmost degree because of the specificity. So let's talk a little bit about that, because your communication is not just communicating with people. You have a very, very unique expertise. So let's talk about that.
All right. Well, I'll just first start by saying I wouldn't be where I am without all the people who have helped me and been on this journey with me. And I feel like I'm constantly standing on the shoulders of so many badass women, like my grandmothers and my like elders that have come before me. So I certainly don't ever claim to be an expert because I'm always a work in progress. And I know that I'm only as good as my mentors and my coaches who have supported me along the way. And so I just want to say that first, like I'm still a learner and I come here with a beginner's mind because there's always so much work to do. And yeah, like you said, my expertise is in racial equity, which is a unique, area, which is all about kind of having hard conversations about leveling the playing field, around the disparities that are in our country inherent to the very structures that have been designed to position people closer or further from opportunities, from the impetus of our country, right? And it's everywhere in the air that we're breathing, this need to really confront the inconvenient truths of our past. And so that's what I dedicate my life to do.
That's so amazing. And, for me, this is probably one of the most difficult things that I've ever done. And anyone who knows me well, probably, or sees my Facebook feed or has known me my whole life, knows that I kind of usually tend to stay away from the controversial stuff. Not in a one-on-one conversation with people, but definitely on social media, or making like big declarations of stuff. And it became apparent to me that I had to start this conversation, or at least facilitate on some level, because I was uncomfortable having the conversation. It wasn't that there's things that I read and that I see and that I believe, but I feel like I don't have a sufficient education in the topics that are being discussed, particularly when it comes to sensitive issues like the Black Lives Matter, because I feel like I don't have the experience, and I'm afraid to like say something and say something wrong. But then what happened was, most recently, and there's been so much happening, and I realized that I might be leaving people out without realizing I'm leaving them out of the conversation by not having the conversation. Yes. And so this is one of the things that I wanted to talk about, because I think there's mistakes that we make in any, doesn't matter who you are or from what side of the fence or what you believe or what you follow, whatever, that there's sometimes hurt happening that you don't realize is hurtful. So how do we become aware? How do we, it's discussions like this. So do you want to talk to that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah. And I just want to appreciate you for showing badass, brave leadership and stepping into the arena. Like what you just described is an awakening journey. I call it waking up, because it really is. Once you wake up from a nice deep sleep, or like when you've been taking a nap and you're awake, you're like, oh snap, like I see things. Or you put glasses on for the first time, you see things differently, and you can't unsee. You can't go back to sleep once you're awake, right? Most of us, at least for me, once I'm awake, it's all like I'm there. I can't pretend. And I think what you just described is almost like an inner conversation with yourself about integrity. This is why I focus so much on integrity and courageous leadership. And then I also talk a lot about brain science, and specifically unconscious biases that are basically what happens when our brains are asleep. And then when we wake up, we realize, oh snap, I have blind spots. Like I didn't know, just like when I'm driving a car, I didn't know to look twice until I realized that was a blind spot. And now I can't unknow what I now know, right? So I'm committed to helping leaders who are like dedicated to that journey of awakening. And it's a daily process. At least for me as a white woman, it's my responsibility. I mean, I'm in an interracial relationship. My partner's an African-American woman. So my process is different. Maybe it's like expedited because every day I see things through a different lens, and I experience things through her eyes. And I'm like, whoa, I didn't see the world that way. You just woke me up to something that I was blind to just 5 seconds ago, So it's a constant journey, but it takes courage to stay in that place of ambiguity, to stay in the place of like, I may be, I need to have my assumptions checked on a regular basis, which is very uncomfortable for people who have been taught or conditioned to believe that like, the truth is the truth, and like all means all. But the truth is, if we're really, really going to talk about inclusion and equity, we have to talk about the ways that the system has not been designed to include all people. So I often say, like, being colorblind is very dangerous. Like, it's a luxury to say that I'm colorblind. I don't see color. That's kind of the epitome of white privilege. So I've had to unlearn a lot of these messages, because I, growing up in Texas, was taught to be colorblind. Like, accept all people, love all, don't ever talk about race, because if you talk about race, you're acknowledging that things are wrong with our country, and there couldn't be anything wrong with our country, right? And so I've had to do a lot of unlearning on this journey myself.
So how do you, where do you start? Coming to you as someone who's like, I don't know what all of this means. I don't know that I'm hurting people, or if I'm hurting people, or when I'm hurting people. So how do you begin that journey? So how do we start this conversation? How do we start to heal this?
Well, you already did it. The first step is to commit to staying at the table. You did it. You said, I care about this. I'm committed. I'm not going to pretend like it's not, like, to stay silent is a luxury. Like, that's just where we're at now. It's beyond privilege. It's a luxury to stay silent. And I'm not trying to, like, shame people for not. Everybody has their own medium. So if you don't post on social media, this isn't like, you better post every day. It's not that. It's like, everybody needs to find their space where they're going to speak up, and they're going to say, I'm committed to being a learner. See the difference? Like, I'm not committed to being on the front lines. To be an ally is a gift, and it's only something that somebody can tell me. I don't get to claim that I'm an ally to someone who has a different experience that's been marginalized in our country. If somebody tells me I'm an ally, that means they see me as someone who's in solidarity, someone who's able to distance myself from my ego, to actually, if I have a seat at the table, then it's my responsibility to make space for some others to be there. Maybe it's holding a lens of, like, first acknowledging who's not at the table. It looks differently for everybody, but the first step is the commitment to stay in it, and to not be silent, and then to be a learner. And then I think, as with anything, right? And that involves so much healing. And this is why I love this topic around activation, and activate yourself first. We have to start by looking in the mirror and really reflecting on, what messages have I internalized? What comes up for me? I had 4 years of having a leadership coach who has expertise in this area, because I knew I couldn't do it alone. I knew I needed to be in a community of support. And so, like, really digging deep and reflecting on what this sparks for you, really, no pun intended. It's like, spark is the light is on, so you can't turn it off anymore. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes total sense. And I definitely want to go into that beautiful segue into Spark. But before we go into all the amazing things that you're doing, and all the resources that you have to help us along this journey, I want to ask you personally, and we started to talk about it before we recorded. How has your experience been as, like, a leader with this topic as a white woman? Like, does that affect your journey, or how has it been for you? And do you get backlash? Like, you don't know what you're talking about? Does that happen?
Good question. It's been interesting, right? Like, I talk a lot about intersectionality, because I, as a white queer woman, hold a lens of the LGBTQ community and my experience in that skin, in that arena, in that world. And so, as a white woman, I find that it's very important to say that on a very regular basis, and to never claim to be the expert, to never say, I have all the answers, or I know everything. I always, no matter what, like, make sure that people know that I'm a learner, that I'm holding space, that I'm doing this because I see it as my responsibility. If I have knowledge, and I've worked for an organization like the National Equity Project, and I consult with organizations talking about what it means to be in cross-race solidarity with co-facilitators and stuff like that. I find that people, it's interesting, right? Like, sometimes your family, your people can be your harshest critics. And I find that the most critique I get are actually from white people. And that's deep. It's like, wow, all right, well, that's fine. It's not about like, thankfully I have done so much self-work and so much self-healing, and I've been in therapy, and I've like done a lot of work to heal, that now I don't take it personally. Like, I see things as a projection. If somebody comes at me with a lot of hate, rage, and anger, I'm like, wow, you have a lot going on that I don't, that's not my experience. And I always get feedback after every engagement that I present or speaking engagement that I do. I always ask for the participants' reflections, and I read them very, very closely. And so if there's an outlier, which is like once in a blue moon, one or two white people will just say like a couple things about this, that, or the other, that I can tell is a projection in some ways. But then every once in a while, there's some really good feedback around like, most recently there was someone who said, I think you should post where if you charge for these services, you should post which organizations are receiving donations. Because I donate to Black Lives Matter and Austin Justice Coalition and in the Texas area. And someone said, you should make that more public. Because I wonder where your money, like maybe it came from a place of a lot of judgment, but then underneath the message, I was like, okay, you really are trying, I see you trying to help me. You know what I'm saying? So there's a lot of layers. We could talk about that for a long time. But I think that at the end of the day, we just have to, this is all the more reason why it's so important that we get more comfortable on our healing journey, because just like anything else, right? Like if you have a broken leg, you're going to limp for a while. And if you try to run a marathon while limping and then try to help people while they're limping, it doesn't work. And we have absorbed and internalized some very painful, oppressive messages from society. And so the inner healing is so critical. And then like, I do a lot of work on emotional intelligence with clients, because it's through that work that's helped me better understand what it is that really triggers me and how I can better understand, like, it's not necessarily about the person, it's about the way they're showing up, or, if this is a new, if we're dancing a new dance together, like we're taking a salsa class for the very first time, of course we're going to fumble. And then we get into a groove and we learn like, right, this is something we have to practice at. And I see us as, in my experience, a lot of, a need for like us white folks to come together and practice. What does it mean to stay at the table with each other and to like suspend judgment for a minute and assume positive intention, assume that everybody's got their path and their journey. And, if we could support each other and lift each other up and say like, I see you, your journey is different than mine. It's actually our responsibility. If we want to be in solidarity with other folks, we have to do this work together. Because it's a big, big burden for, at least in my experience, my colleagues and my partners say that it's like the biggest burden and inconvenience for people of color to have to carry the weight of a white person, like waking up and projecting all the stages of grief onto them. It's not fair. Like my partner and folks in my community, my best friends, like have dealt with enough pain and anger and rage and frustration and grief about some experiences that they've in full on firsthand experience. So when like, if you see something clearly for the first time and you're like, what, I didn't know that you didn't have access to that table. I'm so angry. Like, I need to go yell at white people now. It's like, wait, time out. Like, that's not actually, hold on, check in with yourself first. You know what I'm saying? Like, we have to do this work, both on our own and together. And we can only be better together if we're doing our own work separately. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my entire, principle in terms of communication with people, and when I talk to people, it's like, what is the trigger, or what is happening outside of you, and how is that a reflection of what's happening inside of you, and what is it that you want from that person, and exactly. Really what it is something that you need for yourself. And and so often I see these difficult conversations happening, and it's like, I just want them to understand. Both people are like, I just want you to understand. So it's like, you need to begin by understanding yourself and then giving out and putting out into the world that thing that you want. That's like my number one lesson that I always help people with. If you feel misunderstood, then the first thing you need to do is, number one, start to understand yourself, and then go out and understand somebody else. Like, every conflict begins with, I just want you to hear me. I just want you to understand me. And they're talking over each other, yelling and screaming and, making exclamation marks and like capitalized, like capital letters through their posts. It's like, just see me, just hear me. And it's like, if you would both listen and understand that there's two perspectives, that from that perspective, both people are correct.
Right.
Your perspective, and it's the, Sean Smith, as you know, like we've both seen him speak, and he does a beautiful, speech and talk about just that thing. It's like, what if you're both right? And it's like, your lens and this person's lens are different lenses. So, whatever colored lens yours is, you're going to see that from that lens, and that is truth to you. And that the other person you're discussing with, their lens is the conversations that are happening are based in truth, as opposed to all this like blame and lying. And it's like, okay, this is your truth, but let's talk about, how about you take a look at things through my lens for a moment. And then real conversation can begin to happen, and real healing.
Right, exactly. And that's where it takes courage, right? Like my mentor always says, you are the expert of your experience. Like, no one can tell you don't need all the research. Because I used to be like, Mark, like, what do I say? I need the right thing to quote, or I need to have the right tool to facilitate, like I want to do it perfectly. And he was like, Rachel, your story is what matters to people in these moments. No one can deny you of your experience. And so if you speak from your truth and you stop trying to quote other people, you'll find your magic, and that's when I started to realize I had to be more vulnerable, because I wasn't practiced at sharing my truths that felt very scary to share, or saying out loud, I don't know if this is right. I probably am making assumptions. I know I have blind spots. It took me, I'm not even kidding. Like, I had to practice in front of the mirror before I could speak on a stage, I had to say, as a white woman in front of the mirror 10 times, as a white woman, like it just didn't roll off my tongue because I was so afraid of what would happen if I said it. Like, people would know, or what, like, it was so weird. I couldn't believe how hard it was to say it publicly. In my experience as a white woman, it's my responsibility too. I said that 10 times, again and again and again in the mirror, to say, like, this is my experience. I don't claim to know your truth. I don't want to try to claim your truth. Like, all I can say is what it feels like to be me, and who's a learner, who doesn't have all the answers, who's being really humbled. And I need to show up with curiosity, not certainty. And that's the magic bullet,
Curiosity, not certainty. Yes. Okay, so that's awesome. Thank you so much for that, because I literally think like it needs to be a tweet or a meme, show up with curiosity, not certainty. So use that.
Okay. Yeah, it's part of the S.P.A.R.K acronym. We'll go into it in a little bit. Yeah.
Okay, so tell us a little bit, tell us what you're doing. Tell us about S.P.A.R.K. Now, I know all about S.P.A.R.K. I have the game. You can tell us, what is S.P.A.R.K?
Okay, so S.P.A.R.K is a multi-dimensional social enterprise that is, it started with an idea on an index card, really. I was like, there's got to be more. The spirit of this conversation is like, all right, what do I do with this knowledge and this information? Now I have all this brain science research. I'm facilitating conversations around the country about racial equity. I'm seeing the same patterns play out that they did in my classroom with my teachers. Now I'm seeing it at the boardrooms of superintendents. And I'm like, we adults got to get our stuff together. If we can't have these hard conversations and we're asking kids to, we have a problem. And what we're not practiced at is sharing our stories, sharing our truths, and just slowing down for a minute to be curious and to listen to each other and not assume what someone else's truth is, right? So I was like, there got to be games, or there got to be tools out there that help facilitate this process. I was convinced it existed, and I could not believe that there were no games or activities that facilitated like a story sharing experience. So I was like, my partner was like, if anyone can do it, you can. Like, this is what you're trained in team dynamic. You've got all these tools and skills. Like, just do it, Rachel. So I did. I created S.P.A.R.K. At the time, it was called S.P.A.R.K for Humanity, and it was kind of a play on Cards Against Humanity at the beginning, but that's no longer a thing. It was just like how the idea was like, what if we had a similar process in a card game? Because I'm all about games and like bringing joy and fun to and lightness to this conversation too. As a teacher, I always had to infuse games and like pauses when we're doing really deep, rigorous learning. It's like, let's pause, do 10 jumping jacks. Let's play 2 truths and a lie. Like, we have to, our brains need that. Like, it actually is required. And so I created this idea that started with, again, like an index card. I committed to having a prototype party every month for 6 months. And I just got feedback every month. I was like, well, here it is on index cards. I'll buy you brunch and we'll like hang out. And anybody who's open to being a part of giving me feedback, I would super appreciate it. And I put up this idea on Kickstarter, and lo and behold, the Kickstarter passed. And so here I was, a brand new small business owner, not really knowing what I was doing, just having a really clear mission and a commitment to serving my community. That was 2016, and now it's all over the world, and it's just crazy, like what happens when community, like both is involved in the process, right? This is for the people with the people. Nothing about this was about Rachel. It was like, let's keep tweaking this. Somebody created the design for the box. Another person said, what if we tried this? What if we did a play on like vintage matchsticks? And it's just been very much a community effort. And so for that, I'm so grateful for the S.P.A.R.K community. And what evolved from there was like me going and facilitating S.P.A.R.K events and people being like, whoa, how are you so comfortable talking about race and inclusion and your mission and your why? And I was like, oh, I guess I've had some training and like research, and I didn't think I was an expert, but I guess I am. And so people ask, like, would you put a training or a workshop together about, this approach that you have, which is unique. It's the S.P.A.R.K approach, which is now the acronym, right? So the S stands for show up, which is kind of our very first point, which is what you're doing with this podcast or this video interview TV show. It's like, show up, stay at the table. That's the first step. The second one is pause, listen first, speak second. The third is ask, don't assume, curiosity over certainty. And then R is respect diversity, really the root word of respect. Spect is like glasses, that's where it comes from. Spect is to see, and re is again and again. So imagine if everybody felt seen again and again, like be open to seeing people for all of themselves. And diversity is key for inclusion. And then finally, kindly expect some messiness. And that one's the hardest for people. Like, it's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be polished. This conversation is going to be messy because it's most likely never been done before in this way. And so trust that the messiness is where the magic is. And that's kind of what the whole leadership program is centered around. And now I'm on my 3rd leadership cohort, and I facilitate workshops and do speaking engagements, all because people are, it's not me. It's like there's magic in this moment right now. And it's so powerful that there's so many people committed to being learners and committed to trying new things and committed to having different conversations. So it's a blessing. It's a real blessing.
That's so awesome. I mean, it's such important work that you're doing, and clearly I'm a huge fan, and because these are important conversations, and even just one community or one person doing this work and then does that with somebody else, and then she does that with somebody else and does that with somebody else, we are causing ripple effects, or your initiative is causing ripple effects in the world right now, and it is really receptive to what's happening. Everybody's is in, some people might not be in receptive mode yet, but there are a lot of people that are ready to learn, who are ready to take action, who are ready to be like, okay, what can I do? And it's like when something happens and everybody's like, okay, like, what can I do here? Give me a shovel. Do you want me to you start asking, if someone's building a house or things come down, or, it's like, it was, I live in New York, but I'm from Toronto, and I was in New York when September 11th happened. And, it was an incredible tragedy, and it was like insane, but I'll say that living in New York after that, for a good period of time, it was like the best city to live in, because everybody was like talking and looking at each other in the eye and like, what do you need and how you doing? And like, there was this sense of community in a city that's so busy and that has the typical reputation of being mean, which I never saw it that way, which is why I've lived here for 18 years. But has that reputation of being cold and too fast and nobody cares. It was amazing. It was amazing. And so I see that, and what you're doing is kind of like, you know, there's all this messiness happening right now, and all these things are coming to the surface, and all these tragedies, and really like every day something's going on, and you're like, oh my God, I can't even look at my feed. Like, but it makes me so happy to know that there's people like you, and not just many of the people we're going to have on the show, and many, many, many more who are doing the work, who are, you know, working on, let's heal this at a cellular level within us and bring it to the forefront and have this conversation. So I thank you for that so much.
Yeah, no, it's an honor.
Is there anything that you have coming up that you want to talk about? And, you know, hopefully we'll catch it.
Yeah. So there are a lot of things on the horizon. You know, this is what the blessing of like both community and expansion. We're growing in pretty significant ways. There are the leadership workshops that are online, and there's a range of workshops from facilitative leadership to deep dive strategy sessions around your spark, like kind of unpacking your unique spark, to a specific one for white women, racial justice activists who are really committed to this conversation and want to learn some of the latest like research and kind of best practices around staying at the table here. And and I have a couple slots. Like I'm constantly, every 3 months, I have clients that are graduating out because I have 3 months one-on-one clients. So every month or so, I have a one-on-one client opening. So if anybody's interested in like a deep dive strategy session or a 3 or 6 month coaching relationship, I have a couple openings every once in a while. So yeah.
That's awesome. So so how can people get a hold of you? What's your website? Give us your info.
Yeah, so a couple things. One, if you want to get the card game, I try to keep it simple. So everything is S.P.A.R.K. So S.P.A.R.K and then the number 4, community.com. That's where you can get the card game. And then if you're interested in my leadership development services, it's S.P.A.R.K, the number 4, leadership. And if you're interested in me as a human being and my speaking engagement and my upcoming book and blogs and stuff like that, there's rachelvrosen.com. RACHEL. V as in Victor, ROSEN.com. I'm way more active on Instagram these days. Facebook is it's overwhelming me a bit with all the drama and just, you know, privacy stuff. And I know Instagram is connected, but Instagram feels more safe these days. So Instagram, I'm really active. Same S.P.A.R.K at S.P.A.R.K for community, number 4, S.P.A.R.K for leadership, number 4.
I know that there's such amazing things that you've been working on, so many amazing things, and there's so much amazingness coming, like that I can't wait to see it all unfold for you.
Oh,
thank you. Thank you so much for coming and being my first guest.
Thank you. Like, yeah, no, genuinely, everything is only as amazing as the community that I have around me. Like, nothing is just Rachel. Maybe my book, but even then I have a book coach. Like, I'm genuinely, nothing is myself. I'm only as good as the people I have around me. And I am so blessed to have you in my life, Patricia. You are a light of love and just bold, badass leadership. And it's a beautiful thing to see you shining.
This video was done, this interview was done 2 years ago, and the subject is just as relevant today as it was then, and that is something that needs your attention and your focus, and that is why we are here to listen and to learn. Thank you so much for watching Soul Seekers TV. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the like button so content like this could come through more and more. Thank you so much.